Here is a promise, and I want you to hold it gently, because tonight's case is about the fine print underneath it. Immigration and Customs Enforcement says that by the end of this month, every officer and agent in the field will wear a body camera. The acting director, David Venturella, put it in writing. "On track," he said, "ahead of our original timeline. Cameras on every officer." That is the sentence accountability advocates waited years to hear. And it is exactly one half of a system. A camera creates a record. A policy decides whoever sees it. Tonight, we read the policy. First, why this is urgent. In 2 cases. In July, an ICE officer shot and killed a 25-year-old motorist in Maine, an officer who, by the Associated Press's reporting, had a history of violent behavior. In a separate case, an officer shot a Houston homebuilder. In both encounters, there is no footage because there was no camera. The record of 2 deaths consists of accounts and aftermath. And note the calendar because it testifies. The agency's $30.9 million camera purchase began 1 day after the Maine shooting, on top of $20 million Congress had appropriated in April. That is what these cameras exist to fix. Whether they fix it depends on what happens after the record button. Now the policy, issued February of last year, as the Associated Press obtained it. Officers must activate cameras during arrests, search warrants, and emergency responses. Good. Then, a shooting happens. Here is the path the footage takes. A committee of top ICE officials and lawyers reviews it and recommends whether to release. If they say yes, release could come within 72 hours, after determining, and this is the policy's own phrase, that it is in the best interests of the agency. And above that committee, the ICE director can block or indefinitely delay release upon finding, again verbatim, specific and compelling circumstances. What counts as specific and compelling? The policy does not say, and when the AP asked how the agency decides, it declined to answer. Even released footage gets officers' faces, names, and badge numbers redacted. There is no clock that forces release, and no one outside the agency reviews a decision to withhold. Now, the dispute over what that policy means, and both sides get their exact words. The Associated Press characterizes it this way: ICE will release footage of serious incidents only when the agency deems it in its own best interests. Director Venturella fired back in writing, calling the report misleading and sensationalized, saying it fundamentally mischaracterized the policy by conflating the expedited release provision with the agency's broader release authority, and noting the approach, quote, mirrors other federal law enforcement agencies' policies and is fully consistent with the Freedom of Information Act. So enter both into the record. The AP says the gate is the agency's interest. The agency says the gate is standard practice. What neither side disputes, the gate exists. It is internal, and the standard for keeping it shut is a phrase the agency will not define. Is there precedent for how this discretion gets used? There is, and it is recent. In January, Customs and Border Protection officers in Minneapolis shot a man named Alex Preddy, and cameras captured it. That footage has never been released. Asked when it would be public, the CBP Commissioner Rodney Scott told lawmakers, when it's appropriate. 7 months later, appropriate has not arrived. Christopher Schneider, a sociology professor at Brandon University in Canada who studies police body cameras, reads the ICE policy bluntly. In some ways, ICE is saying the quiet part out loud. Cameras, in his research, often function as image work, tools to present the agency in the most favorable light, and the footage that surfaces is the footage that flatters. Fair shake, fully. The cameras are real, funded by Congress, and arriving fast. The agency says ahead of schedule, and even its September versus August wobble is a fight about weeks, not years. Tom Homan, the border czar, made the strongest case for the program. The American people need to see what that officer sees and hears, and cameras, he says, exonerate agents more often than they incriminate them. He is right, and that is precisely the point. If footage mostly exonerates, an agency confident in its officers should want a policy that releases it on a clock, automatically, because the release rule protects good officers too. Jason Hauser, ICE's own former chief of staff, is less generous about the timing. This is not hard to deploy, he says, but they've slow-rolled it, calling the post-shooting rollout clearly a political response. So here is the verdict, and it fits in one sentence. A camera is not accountability. A camera plus a release rule is, and ICE just promised the first while writing itself sole custody of the second. By the end of August, every field officer records. After the next shooting, an internal committee weighs the footage against the best interests of the agency. A director may invoke circumstances no one has defined, and no clock, court, or outside reviewer can compel the file open. The beneficiary is an agency that gets the credibility of cameras with the discretion of a vault. The cost is carried by 2 families who have no footage at all, and by every future family whose answer waits on the agency's own definition of appropriate. When the next incident comes, do not ask whether a camera was worn. Ask who decided what you saw. I'm Madeline, and this is Pixel Politics.